Hey, I'm Chris Zepp from Make Everything. Welcome back, and today we are going to bring some life to this power hammer and get it running. Check it out. So to start out, I've got to move the power hammer outside of the corner of the shop. Now this thing is pretty heavy. It's about 2,200 pounds, and it's already on this pine sort of base. Now you can see there's some blocks on the front and the back, and those I think were put on before Paul Pinto picked it up, but the way I'd been moving it around is with these machinery skates. Now if you're not familiar with machinery skates, they're an amazing way to move really heavy stuff. I think these are rated for like 6,000 pounds each. So they're basically just really heavy duty wheels. You can jack things up, put them underneath them, and you can move them around. Today I'm going to be using the WD-40 brand Specialist Heavy Duty Grease to keep this machine in running order. Thank you to WD-40 brand for sponsoring this video, and this is going to help this thing work for a long time. I'm going to be building a motor tower for this, which is a kind of normal way to power a power hammer that would normally run off of like a flat belt system that would run in a line shaft. So I'm going to be using a 4x4 column that was left over from a job, cut it down to size, and that's going to be mounted on the back of the pallet so that I can put a motor up top and then run a nice 4-inch flat belt off of it so that I can power this thing. I've got some various pieces of plate and a piece of angle that I'm going to make a bracket to mount around the back of the skid so that the motor tower is able to be bolted to the wood really strong, and then I'll put an attachment point to the power hammer itself to keep it from wobbling. I think overall it's going to be super strong. I'm using my iron worker to punch this 1/4-inch thick piece of angle iron, put a bunch of holes in it, and then I also punch some holes in the top of this piece of plate. And you'll see why in a second. I'm going to be basically making a T-section of metal, and that's going to wrap around the base of the power hammer and then be bolted in on two sides. And that flange over the top where it's doubled up and a 1/2 inch thick is going to carry some of the load of the column itself. Now, I welded it on both sides and tried to do my best here to make sure this was super strong. And then I did clamp it down to the table while it was cooling to keep it from warping and curling up. Back over on the hammer itself, you can see the way that thing's going to kind of latch on there and hook around the wood. I used a chisel here to kill that corner because my weld is in the corner and I wanted to get this thing as tight as I could. And then I used some nice 1/2 inch lag bolts. They're about 4 inches long with my impact driver to drive them into this pine skid. Really make things super strong. Now I put the 4x4 column in place, and I noticed that I could actually put some blocks in between the back of the power hammer and the column to kind of lock it in, and then I could go ahead and level it before I weld it to that base plate. This just happened to sort of work itself out where I had nice spacing there, and I put a couple 2x4s and some plywood in there while I got it level. Now while this is all bolted down and clamped in place, I can go ahead and weld the column to the base plate. I've got a Power Mig 360 that I'm using for this. I've got it turned up pretty good because I'm burning into 1/2 inch plate on the bottom and 1/4 inch plate on the column. Now back over on the bench, I pull my motor out and I start doing some calculations for what kind of plate I'm going to need in order to mount this up top. This is a 5 horsepower 3-phase motor that I picked up at an auction for probably under $50. I've never actually ran it before, but it's perfectly sized for something like this. It's 1,725 RPMs. So I wire it up to a 3-phase plug and plug it in to give it a test run before I go ahead and get it set up and situated on that piece of plate. The shaft was a little corroded, so I cleaned it up with some Scotch-Brite, and that flat paper pulley that you saw in the foreground is going to work perfectly on this shaft. I got the paper pulley on eBay. It was about $100, which seemed like a lot of money for just a single pulley, but it's exactly what I needed, and I think it's going to work out great. I used my metal cutting circular saw to rip this 1/2 inch piece of plate. It's about 12 inches by 18 inches, and this is going to be what the motor is mounted to. Now I want to put a 45-degree brace between the bottom of this plate and the column itself, but I don't want to have to do this up on the power hammer. So what I did is I went over to the bandsaw and I cut up a piece of the same tube, the 4x4, into this 45-degree brace section, and then I'm going to essentially weld it to the base plate as though I'm up on the column, and then I'm going to bring it up there and weld it in place with this bracket sort of in the exact position. It'll make a little bit more sense in a second, but this is just a lot easier than trying to do all this up on the column. the column is a little higher than 8 feet off the ground to the top, so doing as much as I can on the bench is going to make my life a lot easier. Now I'm welding 1/4 to 1/2 here, so I'm making sure that I get a lot of heat into that weld and make sure this is super strong. And you can see I basically temporarily rigged up that other piece of tube to act as though it is the column, and then I can bring this thing over to the power hammer, carry it up the ladder, and weld it in place. Now there are certain parts of this that I know are not going to change, so I'm fully welding them, but something like this, I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to, kind of be here. So I'm sort of tacking this and giving it just a couple of welds to keep it in place so that I can test this before I fully weld everything. Now the next challenge is to bring the motor up, which had to weigh, 150 pounds. And I got it up there, put the pulley on, and then laid the belt over it, only to find that I really didn't need the motor tower exactly where it was. Now I had made it centered on the drive wheel, thinking that that would be fine and this, would be adjustable enough that I could make it work. Unfortunately, I really need that belt a little further over to the right, closer to the idler wheel. So after milling about and thinking about it, I decided I just have to deal with it, carry the motor back down the ladder, unbolt the motor tower, and move it over 4 or 5 inches to give me just a little bit better belt tension when I'm actually running this thing. So I unbolted it, chipped away some of the corner of the pallet, shifted this thing over, re-drilled some holes, re-clamped it in place, and did it all over again. And in the end, I think this was absolutely the right thing to do. I need to get as much motor tension, pulley tension, and belt tension as I can when I'm pressing on that treadle arm. It's going to push that idler wheel that you can see in the foreground into the belt, and that's what's going to cause the power transmission to go from the belt into the drive wheel, into the flywheel, and then actually make the power hammer move. Now I'm just clamping the belt sort of to get an idea of how it's going to look, and you can see as that idler wheel pushes in, get nice tension on it, and I realized that this is actually going to work out way better. Now because I wasn't sure where the motor was going to go, I didn't drill any of the holes in this plate up until this moment. This is where having a magnetic drill, really comes in handy, especially a battery-powered one. So I bring my cordless Milwaukee mag drill up on top of this 8-foot tall tower and drill some 3/4 inch holes with an annular cutter. This is going to work out really well. It's going to give me enough float because I'm only using 3/8 inch hardware to move the motor around a little bit to get that alignment just perfect. It's also going to allow me to put wedges underneath the back side or the front side if I have to work on my motor pulley alignment if the belt is tracking in either direction. Now that I've got that sort of rigged up, I want to make one more brace that'll tie me into the back of the power hammer before I move forward. And I was going to use some tube for this, but I just thought it'd be cooler to kind of bend up a piece of heavy plate so that I could have something that looks like it was forged and bent on something, that does forging. So I took a piece of 3/8 inch thick stock. This is 3/8 by 2. I heated it up with the torch, and then I bent it over in the Wilton vise. Now once this thing is cooled down, it's super solid, and it's going to just look a little nicer than having a whole bunch of tube all welded to the back of that thing. You can see there's already a hole where the previous tower was, so I utilize that, bolt it in, and then clamp it on. I'm going to add one more brace that goes down diagonally from the side of the tower into the base of the power hammer, and that's just going to give me another brace side to side and keep this thing from moving around. There's going to be a lot of force on this, and especially a lot of vibration, so I want to make sure this thing is braced properly. Now that that's done, I can mark the belt, take it down, and cut it with some snips in order to do the lacing. Now this is, I want to say it's called Super Grip. I got it from McMaster, same thing with the belt lacing, and this is typical for a flat belt like this. Now I've never actually used these alligator laces like this, but it was pretty straightforward. You basically use this little metal tool as a guide to set your depth, and then you hammer down these little teeth. You do a little bit on each side, kind of flipping back and forth, and when you're done, you've got 2 sides of a belt that can accept a little keyed shaft, which kind of locks itself in place, and you've got yourself a flat belt. What I think is going to be good about this is this belt is going to stretch, but it'd be really easy for me to make it a little bit shorter by just cutting off the zipper end and putting a little bit, less belt up there. So once I got everything kind of lined up, I cut down the belt edges so that there wouldn't be anything sticking out and the little zipper edges, and then I'm able to install the paper pulley and then install the belt. And then I'll be able to try this thing for the first time. I've never seen it run and get to see how it looks under power. It works. So this was a huge moment. Seeing this thing run for the first time was so exciting. I've actually owned this thing for like 8 months. And since there aren't really any other of these hammers out in the wild, I'd never seen one work ever. So after I tried that out, I threw a piece of plywood under there to kind of watch it go. And I realized that everything that I had clamped in place was going to work out. So I decided to go ahead and weld everything off. Now I went through and made sure that I really penetrated all these welds, got everything super well tacked in and secure. With all this welded in place, I realized that, there might be more adjustments down the line, but I think everything that I might need to do, I can do up at the motor. The next task was to get it off the skates and get it in place, because if you saw in that little test, it was moving a lot. And I'd be afraid that I might break these skates if I try to use the power hammer too much while they're still on there. It wants to vibrate and move, and I don't want to damage anything. So I push it further into this corner, and then I'm able to use my toe jack, which is basically a bottle jack with a little foot on it, to lift up and lower the power hammer very gently down to earth onto some 3/4 inch plywood, and then I can eventually lower it down straight onto the ground. This thing is super heavy, but with a crowbar and some leverage, you can really get it kind of wherever you need. And I think eventually I'm going to spin it around and put it in a different location because I really don't have great access to it. It's still vibrating a lot, but I put some shims under the corners and it helped tremendously. And once I get it into its proper location, I think it's going to actually work that much better. The next task is to add some grease. Luckily, the previous owner added some Zerk fittings, which is going to make getting this WD-40 brand specialist heavy-duty grease into the right spots. This is going to keep metal on metal from wearing, and the heavy-duty grease is going to really be the reason that this thing is able to work for a long time. I don't want it wearing out prematurely, and this is really going to help. I don't know what the original fittings would have been on this, probably oil ports, but like I said, the guy I got it from did a full restoration on it and was running it. So now that I know I've got Zerk fittings, it's going to make maintaining this thing that much easier. I have to jack the ram up a little bit to get to these two on the ram guides, and then there's just a couple more locations to add some grease, and this thing is going to help me, it's going to run really well. So the first time hitting steel with it, I'm totally have no idea what I'm doing. I'm basically just trying to figure out which way I should attack these dies, and I've worked on other power hammers before, used them, and most of them you kind of approach from the front, but these Beaudrys, you really kind of want to approach from the side. So I'm using a piece of 1-inch square stock, just trying to figure out sort of the way this thing works. Letting the hammer hit the material and trying to rotate it a little bit, kind of listening and seeing what's happening up above. The belt is squealing a lot because it's stretching out as I go. So what I'm realizing is that I really need to lean into it in order to get that full speed. But you can see the stroke is extremely short, and this hammer is supposed to be putting out a lot more power. So I think this giant bottom die is really giving me problems. Now that the hammer is running, I'm actually going to be able to take it apart, change the bottom die, and I think it's going to help a lot when it comes to actually getting more power out of it. And you can see, with some time, when I really start leaning into the treadle, I can actually get some work done on a piece of 1-inch bar stock. Pretty impressive considering that the hammer is not tuned at all, and I really only heated this with the Induction forge, so in a real forge, when it got a little bit hotter, I think I'd be able to do even more work with it. Overall, I'm super happy that this thing's finally running, and now I can't wait to get it tuned and do an actual project with it. Super fun process to make an old line shaft machine run off of a modern motor, and I'm really excited for the next steps. All right, that about does it for this video. I'm super excited that this thing is going. There's still a lot I need to do to it. There's a ton of work I can do over here in the linkage with this sort of cam. I can adjust it. I can get more throw out of it. Already, just from using it for the little bit that I did, I stretched the belt out pretty good, which I expected to happen. I talked to my buddy Chris Cash at Mount Filled Metalworks, and he kind of gave me a rundown as to what to expect out of this thing. The smoke off the belt, he said, is normal. And knowing that I was going to need to tighten up the belt, I think I'm going to wind up kind of changing the way the motor mounts with sort of a pivot mechanism with a screw that I can tighten down to give more tension. But either way, there's actually still a little bit of room to go when I lean in on that treadle arm, and I can get this thing up to full speed and full power by really putting my weight into it. So maybe I'll enjoy having that little bit of extra control. So I'm going to wait to shorten up the belt or tighten up the motor. I think the big thing will be adjusting the ram so that it has more travel. Right now it has a very short amount of travel, which means when you're giving it those light taps,
and that slower speed, it's not hitting very hard. But if there was more travel, I would think that as the ram fell, it would hit just a little bit harder. So by adjusting all this stuff up here and cutting down that massive bottom die, I'll be able to get a little bit more out of it. Thank you to WD-40 brand for sponsoring this video. I used the heavy duty grease to grease up all the Zerk fittings on this. Again, now this machine wouldn't have come with Zerk fittings when it was built in the early 1900s, but the guy I got it from must have drilled and tapped these ports, which was really convenient, and the heavy duty grease worked out really great for that. I really like this WD-40 brand grease just because it explains its application really well on the package, and I just feel like I get a little bit better penetration out of it, and it lasts a little bit longer than some of the other lower quality greases that I've used before, especially on some of my other machinery. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you have any comments, please leave them down below if you have any questions about this machine or any tips on how I can tune it up and make it run that much better. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this and more videos in the shop. I had a really good time setting this up. It was one of those things that I envisioned in my head, and to kind of put it all together was really awesome. I'm going to rearrange it a little bit to get some better access to it, and it's going to be really cool to have it in the shop. Check me out right here on Instagram at Make Everything Shop if you want to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. There was a bunch of clips I posted of this when I got it running, and I'm always posting kind of what I'm up to in the shop. There's always a million different things going on. Again, I'm Chris from Make Everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video and the next time I'm using this on a real project. See you there.